emotional standpoint. Oh, you guys aren't gonna like this answer. Hey guys, welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaylin. I'm an American who's lived in the UK for almost 10 years, and today I am answering some of your burning questions. Okay, so by burning questions, I mean not really burning. I mean, I asked my YouTube community what questions they have for me, which feels a bit self-important, but that's what people do on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit subscribe and you'll see my community posts, polls, videos, questions, things like that. I'm very distracted right now by how I feel like my neck looks fat in this angle, but doesn't matter. Okay, so Paul asks, we know you've picked up some British traits, but are there any American ones you've noticed you've introduced to those you know? I would say probably it would be mostly like words and phrases. I've spent the past like 18 months locked in a house with my husband, so I'm just gonna use him as the closest example of someone I would influence, and I feel like he definitely uses more American words and phrases or forgets what the British word for something is, because I often will use the American phrase. So for instance, like bin versus garbage can, or maybe like garbage versus rubbish, because I do say bins quite often. I feel like that's a Britishism too, quite often. But I don't say rubbish because it's just very unnatural. So I still say garbage, and he finds himself saying garbage and gets very frustrated, just as I do when I forget the American words for things. The other thing I would say would be maybe, I think, the American trait of not pushiness, but not being overly polite to the point of like nobody actually accomplishes anything. I feel like I have instilled that in my husband a little bit. There have been a couple of instances in the past couple of weeks where like we've either seen a parking spot or an empty table in a busy area, and there are two sets of people, us and someone else, like going for it at the same time. And I feel like maybe in the past he would have done the British thing of like, oh no, you go, oh no, you go, oh no, you, oh no, you. And then you spend like 10 minutes just saying for the other person to go when really you want to go. And I usually will be like, go, and he gets involved and we rush to the space to get there first. And maybe this is not gonna make me come off that great, but sometimes you just acknowledge that you're both equidistant and whoever gets to the table first wins, and you go for it. Okay, hi, and let's take a break from me answering questions about myself like I think I'm some sort of celebrity. This video is not sponsored. This is not a sponsorship. This is kind of a meta question. For my question today to my audience, which is you, is would you be interested in joining me on a Patreon? In order to have some extra videos on there, develop a bit more of a community. I'm not like tied to this idea, but some people have mentioned it to me because they wanted other ways to support the channel and to support me. So if you'd be interested in joining something like a Patreon or getting access to more videos that other people don't see on YouTube, maybe comment below. Are you a patron for other channels or for other interests in your life? What kinds of things would you like to see? Definitely like include that in your comment just so I can get a feel for who might want to join me. Okay, Barry says, if you could magic yourself back to the US to live full time with none of the real world logistical headaches, would you do it? Barry, this was a bold question because I feel like no answer I give is going to be correct. But the truthful answer would be, if I could move back to the US right now, no logistical nightmares, would I do it? Yes, I would. I miss the US. There's a lot wrong with it, but there's equally a lot right with it. And also I have been basically trapped in the UK for the past 18 months and haven't been to the US and haven't seen my family, so that is playing into my answer. But if you were to say, would you move to the US permanently right now, I would say no. And because I don't really see myself permanently living in either country, I really envision more of a split. So I can work from anywhere. YouTube is not my full-time job, but I do make money from YouTube, but I make money from the Girl Gone London website and other websites. So I'm fully remote and I want to take advantage of that and do a bit of a half and half. So we'll see how that turns out. So I will say the answer is no, I would not magic myself to the US right now to live there permanently. But would I go to the US right now to live for an indefinite period of time? Yes, I would. And that was the sound of all of my British followers clicking off. Next question. Chris says, if you could pick any other decade to have lived in the UK, when would it be and why? I'm gonna go with the 80s because my husband plays a lot of 80s British music and television shows and movies that he likes from the UK that were popular at the time, and it just seems like a fun, good time. I've done no historical research. I don't know if the 80s were indeed a good time in the UK. So if you lived through the 80s in the UK, comment below, let me know, is that a good decade to have chosen to live in? Okay, so the next question from Fraggle200. There's multiple questions. So the first question is, how'd you end up in the UK and why did you stay? I ended up in the UK as a student from the US and I studied abroad from the University of Pittsburgh's Study Abroad program. I decided that I really liked London and I wanted to stay in London, and I basically came back and did more of my degree here. I then met my now husband, and so basically that is why I stayed. Originally I stayed for me and because I wanted to, and then it turned into staying because this is where our life was together and I was in a relationship, and so that maybe explains a little bit of my answer earlier and my thoughts on how I want to split my time. And I do want to spend time in the US because I think I did realize over time that as much as I do like the UK and I do like London, I also do really miss the US. Okay, next question. Or statement rather. Blew my mind in the US that a 5-hour drive isn't considered a long drive. Did it take a while to get used to the fact you can more or less go end to end in the UK in about 10 hours? Definitely yes. We will go on a road trip in America for endless hours and it's just something we'll kind of do on a whim. Whereas when we drive to Scotland here in the UK, it takes us about 8 hours from where we live here to where we go in Scotland, and it's like a whole day thing. You do it like once a year. I'm not saying I would have driven like necessarily 5 hours every weekend in the US to go see something, but it definitely feels like a much more not commutable, you're not going to work, but like a much more achievable driving distance in the US. So yeah, it is really strange that you can go from end to end in 10 hours in the UK. Okay, next question. Do you prefer having Europe on your doorstep with its different languages and money to being able to go anywhere in the US and have the same language and money? Having Europe on my doorstep here is definitely one of the benefits of living in the UK. This is not new. Plenty of expats talk about this who live in the UK. Totally different idea that people here grew up like going to France and going to Spain on holiday/vacation, because in the US, a lot of us haven't even been out of the country. It's, I didn't go out of the country until I was 19 when I first studied abroad, and my parents, I think it was their first time out of the country when they came to visit me. So yeah, it is very cool to have lots of different cultures and countries on your doorstep. Okay, Andrew says, what are your favorite British sayings that you use? I just said someone had a cob on, meaning angry like a male swan. That is probably my new favorite one. I was trying to think about British sayings that I personally use, and I think I don't actually use a lot of British sayings, again, because I feel like a fraud saying them. I use a lot of British words, though, a lot that I would not use in the US, and by British words I mean just like in a different context. So here, everyone, like, everything is lovely. Everything is lovely. Your food is lovely, the view is lovely. The word lovely is just used here all the time, not so much in the US, so I find myself saying lovely a lot in a way that I wouldn't before, which is pretty nice. I also say things like the word quite, like, oh, this is quite good, and also the word proper, to be like, oh, a proper cup of tea, or did you do it properly? I think in the US we would more say like, did you do it correctly, or a really good cup of tea. Like, we wouldn't use proper in the same kind of consistent way they do here. So those are some like nice words that I've adopted. But I did think of my favorite saying that even if I don't say all the time is probably my favorite, and that's someone has lost the plot, to basically mean that like things are falling apart, or things are like absurd or crazy. And I just like how it sounds, and it's a good way of getting the message across that someone has lost the plot. Okay, the next question is from Valerie. Since you've lived in the UK for an extended time now, what do you think is missing in US schools? Okay, so you guys are really going for it. You want to know what instructional topics or life goals need to be taught to K to 12 students. So the thing that I think is missing in US schools is the idea of self-directed learning. So I can speak to this because I went to school in the US, but equally, I've been here long enough to kind of know how the British education system works. And it definitely seems like in the US, particularly in the older levels, we kind of always expect someone to tell us exactly what to do. We learn in the US for the sake of a grade a lot. I am totally guilty of this. If something wasn't for a grade, I would not be interested back in the day. Here, I do feel like they try and instill a bit more like we're learning for the sake of learning, and you get more freedom in terms of like what you write your essays about. You would often be able to like choose within a realm of essay topics in school in the US, but a lot of it is like read page 20 to 25 and then we're gonna have a quiz. Whereas here it seems like, yes, they do that kind of stuff, but to a lesser extent, and they really, I think it's still a bit more of you learn and you find things you're interested in for the sake of learning and not just to get an A on your quiz. The other part of the question was, what topics do I think should be taught in particularly US K to 12 students? Everyone tends to say personal finance to answer this question. I feel like I did have I remember learning how to fill out a check in high school, and I remember having some sort of class on it, but it wasn't an entire class. It was like they took our geography class and just did like a section on personal finance. But yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of kind of real life skills would be useful. The other thing I thought of was something about like, not productivity necessarily, but maybe like organization and making plans and making goals and sticking to them. I've been really lucky in that just naturally comes to me. I am very luckily good at like planning out something that I want to do and sticking with it. But I do feel like in school you're not necessarily taught those skills, because I do think it is a skill for a lot of people, and it's sort of like, well, if I'm not good at it from the first try, then I'm not necessarily going to ever be good at it. Whereas I feel like they need to kind of like teach the process of getting good at something, if that makes sense. The other thing I thought, which I know all of you are probably yelling at your screens at home, is in the US, they should teach more worldwide history and news. I did take multiple world history classes. However, I do seem to remember in most history classes, we ran out of time in the school year, and not only did we like not finish US history, but there was just like no time for other history. So we are very US centric in a lot of our history lessons, especially when I was growing up. I don't know what the curriculum is like now, but they would always rush through the modern day. So I could tell you anything about like the 13 original colonies and the War of Independence and no taxation without representation and 1776 and like all of this, and the original Native American tribes. I can tell you all of that, but if it comes to like 1950 to whenever I was in school, like present day, that was like one day at the end of the year, because they just ran out of time. So I'm not actually that good on more recent history. I'm better on like older history that they spent more time on in the beginning of the school year. Okay, next question from the Drama Dorks. Where has your favorite tourist destination been in the UK and why? My favorite place in the UK is Kynance Cove in Cornwall. and that is because it basically feels like a tropical paradise. I went to it a couple of years ago when I was really feeling jaded with the English countryside and just wanted to see something different, and I had no idea how beautiful it was down there. I'd always heard Cornwall is amazing and beautiful, but going there, it just felt like a whole nother world. And Kynet's Cove in particular was, the day we went was beautifully sunny, so that helps. But you know, like the sand was really pure and bright, and there was a seal bobbing up and down in the water, and people were like, it just felt, yeah, like I was on a tropical island. And I was on an island, but not necessarily a tropical one. So Kynet's Cove in Cornwall, if you haven't been, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Okay, Nicola says, will you ever do a video with your hubby? Maybe, probably not. You might catch a glimpse of him in some of my videos when I forget to edit him out when we're together and going places. He is my camera person usually if we're out and about, but he doesn't want to be on screen doing videos with me, but I think I might manage to get to use his voice more in some pronunciation differences videos, and maybe I can convince him to get on screen. But for now, you're stuck with me. Okay, Falcom says, what do you love about London and what's your favorite restaurant there? So the original thing that I fell in love with London for is how easy it was to get around as a solo traveler. So I wasn't necessarily a solo traveler, I was a student, but I had classes that were different from my roommates, and I wanted to do some things sometimes on my own, and I just felt really safe about going around the city by myself, exploring it by myself. I found the tube really easy to understand, and in that way I think it's a very approachable city for anyone, but particularly for people who do want that sense of independence but maybe haven't done that much traveling. I think it's just, I still to this day find London really easy to navigate, and I find myself feeling pretty safe as I do it. And my favorite restaurant in London is called Ciao Bella, and it's an Italian place that was near where I used to work, so I know I did pick an Italian restaurant as my favorite restaurant in London, but they've got very, very good pasta and not too far from the British Museum. Next question, which country do you think would be better for children to grow up in? City versus city and suburbs versus English village. So I'm just gonna address the first question because I'm not sure, I haven't lived enough of all the different options to compare. From a practical perspective, you kind of have to go with the UK being better to raise a child, simply because there's little fear of like gun violence in schools here. So, I mean, I know a lot of you are gonna be like, of course the UK is better to raise a kid because there is no fear of gun violence in schools. So practically, sure, that would be my answer. From a more emotional standpoint, oh, you guys aren't gonna like this answer. I think that the US would be where I would want to raise a kid. And the reason is, I've talked to my husband a lot about his childhood experiences, going to British schools, what he learned, what he was taught, the general vibe of things, and I feel like there's just something about a US childhood that is just a bit more vibrant. You know, I was kind of talking in my other video about how Americans are really good at school spirit. Basically, every movie that you have seen that depicts American high school is basically accurate. The lockers and the pep rallies and the whole town going to the football game from the time you're little, and you wear the high school's, you know, like, they're not called pride t-shirts, high school like mascot t-shirts. Like you have gear for the local high school, which is basically secondary school. And British people are like, what? That makes no sense. But there's just something that seemed a little bit more fun about my childhood compared to my husband's in the UK. I know there are lots of there are extracurriculars here, and kids do play sports and get involved in things. Still, when I compare like to like, the extracurriculars that I was offered at my school, which was just a basic public school in Florida, compared to what my husband had access to, it just seemed like I had more fun, and so I would like to probably raise a kid in the US. Like I said in another video, I also do prefer a US summer when it comes to the school system. I know here 6 weeks is pretty much what they have, which people are perfectly fine with. That's what you're used to, but there's just something like magical about a long US summer that I think really allows for like a lot of creativity and going lots of different places, or even when we couldn't go different places, just lots of like imagination happening in our neighborhood with this extended period in front of us. Maybe this is all idyllic, rose-colored glasses, I don't know, but I'm gonna have to say the UK wins from a practical perspective, and for me, the US wins from a social and emotional perspective growing up. The next question is, what British traditions do you like? So this isn't necessarily a tradition, it's just baked into the holidays here, but I love that we get 4 days in a row off for Easter here, and for Christmas, you get the day after for Boxing Day. Boxing Day is not a thing in the US, so you go right back to work. And also Easter, we usually just take Easter Friday, the Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. We don't have, we don't do anything on the Monday. A lot of people will go back to work. Also, now that I'm talking about it, I really like giant chocolate Easter eggs and exchanging them at Easter. We do Easter in the US with like Easter egg hunts and like Easter baskets. So we do give things and like Peeps, if you've ever heard of Peeps. But here everyone just like goes full on chocolate with the giant chocolate eggs, and I can definitely get on board with that. Lee has a question about the US. My wife and I love small town USA. However, we're planning to do the train from Chicago to San Francisco. Of the 2 cities, which would you say has more character so we can seek out the locals outside the touristy areas? This will affect how long we stay in each city. So I haven't actually been to Chicago or San Francisco. They're very different cities from what I've heard. So I'm going to open it up to my readers. Has anyone been to Chicago or San Francisco? I know I've got some US viewers. Comment below and help Lee out in the comments. Chicago versus San Francisco. How long should you spend in each, and which one is better? So now this has become a travel advice video, so we're covering really all the bases. Okay, so the next question is, have you been to the north of England, and why is it the best part? Which made me laugh. So yes, I have been to the north of England. I've been to Manchester and a few other places. I hope I'm not embarrassing myself, and Manchester really is in the north, which I feel like it is, but I get very confused by the Midlands versus the north, because coming from London, everything feels like the north, but I'm pretty sure I'm talking about the actual north. And why is it the best? Honestly, people in the north that I have met are super friendly and super nice, and the kind of atmosphere of life up there definitely seems to be more similar to what I'm used to in the US in terms of like outward friendliness. So I would say I'm definitely a fan of the north of England, and I would recommend everyone to experience it. It is definitely a different vibe than in the south. Okay, next question from Joseph. In your opinion, what is the biggest stereotype that us Brits abide/go against, or perhaps the weirdest trait that most have? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think the stereotype that people have correct about the British is the general sense of like reservedness and the stiff upper lip kind of culture. That definitely does come across as a stereotype, and it kind of seems to ring true. Not for everyone, but in general, yeah, the culture definitely is pretty, not make a big deal over things unless it's the finals of a football match, and just generally like shut up and get on with it. So I think that's pretty true. The stereotype that I feel like is false though is, so in the US, we think of British people as having like one standardized accent that sounds kind of like the BBC. When you move here, you realize that is 100% not true. Most people don't sound like that. There are accents from all over, and of course, like that's just in England. So if we're talking about a British accent, you know, a Scottish accent and a Welsh accent are very different from English accents, and everyone's got their own way of pronouncing things and their own idioms and even their own languages in some instances. So I think stereotypically the rest of the world paints the UK as like everyone is walking around sounding like we're used to like Hugh Grant in a rom-com, and that is not true. So I've definitely enjoyed getting to know the different accents, and maybe one day I'll do a video on seeing if I can actually pick out the different accents. The next question is, have you made any British friends away from your husband? Unfortunately, not really. I have made friends away from my husband, but they're mostly expats, and that's for no particular reason than those are the communities that I've gotten involved in. At my old job, I did work with 2 British people. We didn't have much more of like a larger network of coworkers or anything like that, so it was kind of hard to meet people because I spent my whole life commuting and then just at work, where I didn't get to meet that many new people. So I do need to go out and expand my horizons a bit more. I do have some British friends, but I actually have them from the US when we all worked at a summer camp together in the US. So I haven't made them here in the UK. So they are British, but they don't necessarily count as friends made in the UK. I've found it difficult, definitely, to make friends here, and it's something that I want to get better at. Okay, the next question is, obviously I don't want to know your religious or political views. Did you find it strange, though, moving from a secular country that is highly religious to a country that has a state-funded religion that isn't so much? This is a great question, and I feel like it could be a topic for a whole nother video, so I might make it one. The answer is 100% yes. I do find it strange. There are a lot of things. I don't find it strange in this, like, I do understand it. I don't find it weird, but it is completely different than what I'm used to. So in the US, we do have the separation of church and state, but tons of people go to church, tons of people are religious. It's kind of baked into our culture. Whereas here, it seems baked into like school, like you might grow up going to religious assemblies and learning religious songs, and but it's not really part of the culture as much. There are people here who go to church. Obviously there are church communities, but it is far, far less than in the US. Like in the US, you go out to breakfast on a Sunday, like mid-morning, and you run into the church crowd, which is basically everybody going to breakfast after church. That doesn't really exist in the UK in terms of like a cultural phenomenon of everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people being religious. It was really strange to get used to. And the last question, is it coming home? No, it did not. This was in reference to the England versus Italy football/soccer for you Americans match that happened. So yeah, that didn't work out so well. However, I would like to turn this into a teachable moment, i.e. you teach me things, because I would like to know the phrase, is it coming home or it's coming home? What does this mean? I can only guess that it means that football has gone somewhere or has left England and now you're like waiting on it to come home. But my question is, where did it go and why? Because England has been playing football this whole time. Does it just mean like England has been bad at football and now they're gonna be good again if they win a match? I don't know. You football fans, let me know down below. Okay, so welcome. No, not welcome. You've made it to the end. Welcome to the end of everything and this Q&A video. I feel like a lot of people are going to be up in arms about some of my responses to things because people don't like it when I prefer US things to the UK things based on the fact that my video about things that the UK does better than the US has been viewed like 40,000 times, and my video on things the US does better than the UK has been viewed like 4,000 times. But these are just my lived experiences, my honest opinions, and they are just that, opinions. So if you have a different one, leave them below. And if you have actually made it this far, I'm gonna leave another Easter egg, and please comment down below. What should you comment? Comment something make a mention of like the last thing I said. Be like, oh, I agree with the last thing you said, or I can't believe the last thing you said. So I know who is actually like fully committed to these videos and is still listening to me ramble on, even though you should go do something way more important and productive. But okay, leave your comments down below. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you next time.